to Great Chesterford Junction Model Railway, and this is an update for July 2024. Well, in the last, or since the last major update I should say, and since the driver's eye view run around the layout here, I've been working on my fiddle-yard cassettes. I've sort of stopped doing scenery for the moment. I just want a bit of a change of tack to keep me interested and try something different. So yes, I've been working on my fiddle-yard cassettes because storage here is starting to become a problem for me. Not in that there's not enough storage on the railway itself, however I just keep collecting stuff, and it's starting to mount up, and I need some cassettes to actually hold some more trains. So I thought, I mean, I've done this story about cassettes before, how they work and all that sort of thing, and there's one of the original cassette I made which just holds one rail car, but I expanded out to a 4-foot long one, or 1200 millimeters, and I've decided to make some more of those. So I've made another 2 of those, so I've got 3 at the moment, and I'm working my way up to 6 or 7, depends what I can fit in the drawer. So I thought I'd take you through a look at the actual cassette, the 4-foot one, and what's involved in making it. So this is the cassette I'm talking about, and we want to take that off, so I'll just have to get this train out of here. So I'll send the train around to Great Chesterford Junction and put it in platform number 4 around there, and then we can take the cassette off here, and then I can take it out to the bench and better explain what's involved in putting it together. Right, we'll just whack it on the bench here. Right, this is what we start with. This is a length of, this is actually marine ply. It's 18 millimeters thick. I've cut it to exactly 76 millimeters wide. It has a trench cut in it, 18 millimeters wide and about 3 millimeters deep. And the reason for this trench is that the aluminium angle sits on there. The aluminium angle is 1.5 millimeters thick. Now the flanges on some of my old stock, especially Lima locos, about 1.5 mils. There's somewhere between 1 mil and 1.5 mils, and I thought it's just not enough playroom for me. So I just wanted to make it absolutely safe, and so that's why I put the trench in there. Before we actually start adding aluminium to this piece of ply, first thing we do is we drill a hole in the centre here. Now that's a locating hole to put it on top of my turntable, which I use to rotate the cassettes, and we have a hole at each end, one hole at each end, and that takes a stem off an end stop, so that keeps that secure. So those holes have to be drilled first, and then we're ready to start adding aluminium to the top of it. Now the first thing I usually do is I drill these holes that will actually fix the aluminium angle to the marine ply, and these are spaced at 110 millimeters apart. Not necessarily has to be 110 millimeters, but it just seems to work for me. That's the standard I've come to use. And when the holes are drilled, they're also countersunk with a countersunk bit, so that the screws can be flush with the surface. I've taken this precaution because if you get in here with a track rubber, I mean you don't want to be catching on the heads of screws as you go along. So it's just worth taking the trouble to keep them flush, and it stops you catching your hand on it or anything like that, or you know, possibly some stock catching on it some way. It's extremely unlikely because it's too far away from the stock, but that's just the logic behind that. So pretty much every hole that's drilled in aluminium on these things is countersunk to set the head of the screw or bolt or whatever is used to within the body of the aluminium that it's being used on. To drill the aluminium accurately, I have a drill press here, and I've made a table to go on top of the standard table that comes with a metal drill press, and I've put some slots in this so that I can actually have a fence, a sliding fence that can be fixed into place here. So what I can do is I can set the fence at approximately 15 mils, which is half the depth of the aluminium. I can set that, lock it in, and then I can mark out my positions on the aluminium, and then I can just slide it along, and I know that I'll be drilling out the same distance every time. And I leave it in place when I come back to do the countersinking as well, because it's in the correct position. So that makes the job a lot easier. For doing the aluminium flat bar, which we'll come to later, I've also got another jig which is just made up out of timber. The aluminium flat bar, I just grab a piece. The aluminium flat bar can just sit in there against the fence if necessary, and it's in the right position and it can be held and drilled. So yeah, just simple little jigs that make life a lot easier and more accurate. Now when the holes are all drilled and you're ready to go with screws and everything, it's time to assemble this thing. And what I do is I put one side on first, and it's basically pretty much flush with the side of the marine ply. And I clamp it down and check it a couple of times to make sure that it's lined up properly, and then screw it all in and set it up so it's all done. And then when it comes to adding the second rail, now this is critical. You need a track gauge, and what I'm using for a track gauge is a piece of 16mm ply, and it's got paint on both sides, and it works out, believe it or not, it works out perfect. I set it up so it fits in there, but there's a little bit of wiggle room. And if you check this against a piece of Code 100 straight track, it's a nice fit in there, just a nice fit. So this is an ideal track gauge for me. I guess there's other ways of doing it. You can get dedicated track gauges to check it, but that's done that way. So the second rail is lined up and checked several times with the track gauge, and as the screws are fitted in, I'll use the gauge to make sure that nothing's too tight or too loose for that matter, and constantly checking to see that it's flush with the side as well. So they both overhang the side just a fraction. You can feel it, but I don't know whether I could measure it. But anyway, so that's how it's done. And then of course, while you're doing it, it's good to check with some wagons or any rolling stock you've got to make sure that everything runs freely down in between the rails. So that's a simple track gauge that I've got to do the job. Now this aluminium angle, it comes in 1 metre lengths, and it's 1 metre by 30 by 30 by 1.5 thick. And so as my cassettes are actually 1.2 metres, I need to add an additional piece on. So I've cut a 200mm length section here, which is screwed on the same way as the bigger sections, and just to ensure electrical integrity, I get a small bit of aluminium flat bar and I bolt that on either side of the joint. Now I've tested these without the flat bar on there and they still work, but you know, as soon as you say, well, I'm not going to go the whole hog and put the flat bar on, well then you're going to have a problem with the electrical conductivity. So we put this on. It also braces it, which is a good thing. I mean, that's as tight as a drum there, and you run your finger over it and you can only just feel a slight join there. So that's why that's there. And while we're on the side here, these handles are made from 10mm by 3mm aluminium flat bar. These are 120mm from the base of the marine ply there up to the top of the handle there. And of course you can see that I've drilled through here, so I've got a bolt that goes through there to anchor it to the aluminium angle. We've got a wood screw in here to anchor it to the marine ply, and we've got a wood screw in here because we've got a dowel, a 16mm dowel timber for the handle. So it's done identical on both sides. When I'm usually putting them together, I stand the handle here, or the support for the handle, down flat against the base of the marine ply here, and work out where this hole should be drilled. I then drill the hole, and then I come back and I bolt this piece here with a nut on the other side here. I fix it to the aluminium angle,
and then I take a square and make sure that it's sitting vertical by resting the square across the top of the angle here, and then I know the position of this screw, so I mark that out, drill that, and then I can fit it, and then I know that that's vertical. Once the handle supports are in place, I simply take a piece of 16mm dowel, make sure the ends are square, and work out the measurement between the handle supports, and cut the piece of dowel and give it a bit of a sand, and then I take it over to the drill press and stand it vertically and drill a centre hole in each side for the screws, and then it's simply screwed on. There's no fancy work done on it, it's just a piece of dowel unfinished, and it's nice and smooth. So there's two of those, and the dowels on the handles are spaced at 400mm. So if you think of the cassette as divided up into three 400mm sections, and this is just, for me, it's just quite a comfortable spacing to actually lift the cassette comfortably. Now the end stops, originally I was making them out of this piece of plastic angle, and then I've got a shelf support bolted onto that, and then around, and I've done a bit of a cut out here, and on the other side I've got a bit of rubber for the buffers when they make contact with it. Now these work pretty well, however it turns out that they're not a universal size. I was getting variation in the size of these shafts, so I couldn't take the stoppers from one cassette and move them over to another cassette. Not that that would happen very often, but I sort of liked the idea of having a universal system. So what I did instead with these two new cassettes, I've come up with a different idea. What I've done for the new design is I've taken a bit of 2x1 timber or 20x40mm timber, and I've drilled a hole, a 7mm hole, right through the middle of it. And into that hole goes one of these wall plugs. It fits into a 7mm hole, and you can set that wall plug at the depth that you want to go through into the marine ply, and then you put a little screw, whoops, lost it, get another one, a little screw like so into the end of it internally, and when you screw it home into the wall plug, it locks it in place within the piece of timber. So we now have a universal system that allows the end stop to go in. It's quite simple, and because it's nearly the same dimension as the internal measurement here, it's, you know, there's a bit of wiggle room. It won't move about. So you can take it out and you can turn it around, and it goes in either way. So yeah, so they'll be interchangeable from now on. And I've rounded the corners off here just to make it less prone to catching anybody. And on that subject, I've also introduced this rounding off onto the ends of the cassettes as well, because in the past I've caught myself with the sharp corner there. And to give myself a template, all I'm using is a washer to mark out the shape of the curve, so that's constant as well. Now if we turn this thing on its side, notice that underneath I've got these aluminium flat bar skids, we'll call them, and they are skids because they're supposed to allow the cassette to slide fairly easily along a base, because my cassettes are pushed into a couple of prongs to make contact with the actual rail on the railway. Now the skids are spaced fairly evenly. This one, and another two identical ones along here, this one and the end one, are purely there as skids and basically to set the cassette at the right height. The intermediate ones here, these are set at 300mm back from the end of the cassette, and the matching one down this end is this one, 300mm back from the end of the cassette, and they're set at that distance because they actually match up with the release mechanism that I use to remove the cassette from the prongs that it connects into to make contact with the rail. And one of the last things I do is I now score a line across the aluminium there in the centre of the cassette, and then I just colour that with a graphic marker, and that shows me where the centre line is, or the centre of the cassette is, when I'm holding it up in the air and trying to put it onto the turntable. I have an identical sort of mark on the turntable as well, so if I line up the two marks I know exactly where the hole is, and I can just slide the cassette into the turntable.
Well folks, I think that just about covers the making of the cassette without actually showing you the actual process of drilling each hole, which is a bit repetitive. There's lots of holes to be drilled, and these things actually take a good couple of days to put together. Probably, if I was realistic, it's about 3 days, and I'm not doing it full time every day, but you know, you just get a bit sick of drilling so many holes and putting so many screws in, so yeah. Good parts of the day are taken up by doing it, but the end result is really worth it. Anyway, that's all I've got for you this month, so I'll catch you next month, and take it easy. I'll see you later.